When a woman is found dead inside her own home, detectives knew right away that something about the case was off. The house was full of strange details, suspicious clues, and small things that just did not line up. Police found the answer much faster than anyone expected, but even then, they had a hard time believing what had really happened because the story behind it sounded almost too bizarre to be real. Shirley Pierce was born on August 11th, 1950, in North Carolina. She grew up in a big, loving family, and from the time she was young, people knew her as someone kind, warm, and easy to be around. When Shirley was 20, she married a man named Randall Pierce. They had a daughter together, but after 11 years, the marriage ended, and Shirley had to raise her daughter on her own. For many years, she worked as an executive assistant at Charlotte Motor Speedway in Concord. It turned into a really successful career for her, and during that time, she also developed a passion for classic cars. Later, when Shirley was around 50 years old, she started a new job as an executive administrative assistant at Tuscarora Yarns, a textile company in Mount Pleasant. That was where she eventually met a man named Chuck, who did some business with the company. They started dating, and 3 years later, they got engaged. At that point, Shirley was 62. Her relationship with Chuck was strong, but they still lived far apart. Shirley had a house in a small town called Enochville, while Chuck lived about 110 miles away. So, during the week, they lived their separate lives. And then on weekends, one of them would usually make the drive so they could spend a few days together. Most of Shirley's weekdays were built around work. She took her job seriously, sometimes staying at the office for 12 hours or more, and people knew they could count on her. But Shirley's life was not just work. She was involved in charity, loved being outdoors, and she enjoyed traveling whenever she had the chance. More than anything, though, she loved spending time with her grandson, and she tried to be with him as much as she could. In late July 2013, Shirley spent the weekend at Chuck's place, then drove back home. The next day, she went to work and stayed at the office late. On her way home, she talked to Chuck on the phone, and they made plans to see each other on Tuesday. Chuck was leaving for a business trip, and he was supposed to bring his dogs over so Shirley could look after them while he was gone. The next day, July 23rd, Chuck pulled up to Shirley's house and immediately noticed that the garage door was open. He walked inside the garage, planning to enter the house through the door in there, but to his surprise, it was locked. That did not feel right. Chuck could not imagine Shirley leaving the garage wide open, going inside, and simply forgetting about it. He rang the doorbell, but no one answered, so Chuck went to get the spare key Shirley kept under a tree, hidden inside an old KFC box. At that point, he still did not think something truly terrible had happened. Before going inside, he let the dogs out and checked Shirley's mailbox, but there was nothing there. When Chuck entered the house, he noticed the mess almost right away. That was when he really started to worry. Shirley always kept her home spotless, but now the kitchen and her bedroom were in disarray, almost as if some kind of struggle had taken place. The TV was still on in the bedroom, but Shirley was nowhere to be seen. Then, Chuck heard running water coming from the bathroom, so he went to check. What he saw there horrified him. Shirley was lying in the bathtub. There was blood everywhere, and Chuck knew immediately that she was dead. He ran out of the room and tried to call 911, but his hands were shaking so badly that it took him several tries to dial the number correctly. When he finally got through, he told the dispatcher that his fiancée was dead. The dispatcher asked him to go back into the bathroom and check whether Shirley had a pulse, but Chuck said he could not make himself walk back in there. From the way she looked, he said, Shirley had clearly been dead for a long time. Crimes like this were almost unheard of in their town, so the 911 dispatcher sent every available officer to the house, along with other emergency responders. When police arrived, one of the first things they noticed was blood. There were spots of it throughout the house, starting near the garage and leading all the way toward Shirley's bedroom. They also found a bloody shoe print on the mat by the front door. Inside the living room, officers saw the contents of a jewelry box had been dumped across the floor, with the box itself lying nearby. In Shirley's bedroom, items from her purse had been emptied out onto the bed. Detectives also noticed that some of the blood in the bedroom had been covered with what smelled like bleach, and several paper towels were lying nearby, as if someone had tried to wipe the blood away. Then, officers went into the bedroom, and even they were shaken by what they found. Shirley's body was covered in cuts and abrasions, and something that looked like a broken blade was still lodged in her neck. Everything about the scene made it clear she had been dead for at least several hours, and by then, she had lost almost all of her blood. The medical examiner later confirmed that Shirley had been stabbed and cut many times. Based on the number of wounds, the attack had lasted at least several minutes, and the defensive injuries all over Shirley's body showed that she had fought hard to protect herself. As for the wound to her neck, the killer had driven the knife in with so much force that the blade broke off and stayed inside her body, and that wound was the one that killed her. But there was one more problem for experts. They could not collect anything useful from under Shirley's fingernails because her nails had been cut very short. So even if she had scratched the killer during the struggle, there was no way to recover a usable sample from him. As for the time of death, experts believe the attack had happened the previous evening or sometime during the night, roughly 10 hours before Shirley's body was found. While crime scene technicians were inside the house collecting fingerprints and DNA, detectives spoke with Chuck. Since he was Shirley's fiancé, he was one of the first people they had to consider as a possible suspect. Chuck told them he had last spoken to Shirley the previous evening while she was driving home from work. He said the call had suddenly cut off, but at the time he had not thought much of it. Investigators also asked him what he had touched inside the house, basically where they should expect to find his fingerprints or DNA. Chuck said he had only touched the door handle, the shower curtain, and the tap, because the water had still been running. He also said he had touched Shirley's forearm. He was in shock, and in the moment, he was not fully processing what he was seeing. But as soon as he felt how cold her body was, the reality hit him. Shirley was dead. At that point, detectives did not hear anything in Chuck's answers that set off alarms, and they had no real reason to treat him as their main suspect. At least, not yet. As investigators studied the scene, it started to look less like a random attack and more like something personal. The number of injuries on her body suggested a level of rage that did not feel random. And the jewelry box dumped out on the floor, along with the items from her purse scattered across the bed, looked less like a real robbery and more like someone trying to make it look like one. Nothing valuable seemed to be missing. Even the gold ring Chuck had given Shirley was still on her finger. On top of that, the killer had clearly used bleach, apparently trying to wipe away anything that could point back to them. And since Shirley had been killed the night before, that person may have spent hours inside her house. That did not sound like a random burglar. It looked more like someone who knew Shirley lived alone and felt confident that no one would suddenly walk in. So detectives began looking more closely at the people in Shirley's life. But before they could get very far, a strange call came in. This was all happening in the first few hours after Shirley's body was found. But the news had already started spreading amongst her friends and coworkers, and one of them picked up the phone and called police. His name was Irvin Johnson, and he was the CFO at the company where Shirley worked. Right away, Irvin told detectives he had an idea who might have killed her. His wife, 61-year-old Marlene Johnson. According to Irvin, the problems between Marlene and Shirley had started years earlier, almost as soon as he took his new job. In 2007, 6 years before Shirley was killed, Marlene came to Irvin's workplace, and he introduced her to some of his coworkers, including Shirley. For Marlene, something about that moment set off a fixation. She decided there was something going on between her husband and Shirley. From then on, she was convinced they were having an affair. Irvin told her over and over that Shirley was only a coworker, but Marlene would not believe him. Month after month, she became more certain in her own mind that the affair was real, and she started looking for proof. At one point, their daughter saw Marlene crawling under Irvin's car. After that, she and Irvin checked underneath it and found a GPS tracker. Marlene also kept showing up at his workplace, watching him and trying to catch him doing something. About a year later, the situation turned violent. During another argument over the affair Marlene believed he was having, she grabbed a knife and seriously injured Irvin. After that, he got a restraining order against her, moved out, and from then on, they were separated in every practical sense, even though they were still legally married. Marlene was also ordered to stay away from Irvin's workplace, but she ignored that more than once. On one occasion, she even came to the parking lot and slashed the tires on his company car. Later, Irvin found that someone had broken a window at his house and replaced it with a sheet of plastic held on by Velcro so it could be opened easily from the outside. He was convinced Marlene had done it to give herself a way into his home. But that was only the beginning. When detectives spoke with people close to Shirley, they learned even more. Over the years, Marlene had physically attacked Shirley twice, and both times, Shirley had gotten restraining orders against her. Even more troubling, the most recent one had expired only a few weeks before Shirley was killed. The first attack happened at a charity event Shirley had been involved in. Marlene went after her there, and Shirley suffered minor injuries. After that, she asked the court for protection. The second incident happened in 2011, 2 years before the murder. Shirley had gone to a restaurant with several coworkers, including Irvin. It was a place they often stopped by on Fridays after work. Before long, a waitress came over and warned them that Marlene was sitting on the other side of the restaurant. When they looked over, they saw her hiding behind a menu, holding it in front of her face and peeking out at them. Shirley decided to leave, and her coworkers even lined up in front of her, trying to block Marlene in case she came at Shirley. And that is exactly what happened. But they couldn't hold her back. Marlene knocked Shirley to the floor and started beating her, and afterward, Shirley had to go to the hospital. After that, Shirley got another restraining order against Marlene, but she chose not to press charges. She believed the order would be enough and that Marlene would not hurt her again. Detectives also spoke with the waitress from the restaurant, and that led to another disturbing detail. She said Marlene had offered her good money to install hidden cameras inside the restaurant so she could record Irvin, Shirley, and their coworkers. Since the group came in so often, Marlene believed the cameras would help her prove the affair she was so convinced was happening, but no one on staff agreed to do it. Finally, detectives talked to Shirley's best friend, and she said Shirley had brought up Marlene many times. Shirley had told her about silent phone calls and said she was sure Marlene was behind them. Even worse, just one day before she died, Shirley said she was seriously afraid of her and worried that Marlene might actually do something. In the past, Marlene had left dead flowers on Shirley's doorstep. She had also gotten into Shirley's office and left threatening notes. So Shirley had started to wonder whether Marlene's behavior might eventually turn into something even more dangerous. By that point, detectives had plenty of reasons to focus on Marlene. But before they could make their next move, an officer from a nearby town called in with a strange story. He said he had been sitting at a red light when a woman suddenly got out of the car in front of him, walked up to him, and demanded to know why he was following her. Then, she said that if he thought she had killed someone, she had not done it, and she had an alibi. She also claimed her sister had heard on the news that police were looking at her for a murder, and then called to warn her. The officer had no idea what murder she was talking about, so he reached out to other departments nearby and asked if anyone had just found a body or started a murder investigation. That was when he learned Shirley had been found dead only a few hours earlier. and he passed everything along to the detectives working the case. He also told them the woman had seemed extremely nervous, and while she was talking to him about the murder, he noticed fresh cuts and bruises on her hands. Before she got back into her car, Marlene told the officers she was on her way to her attorney's office, and if police wanted to talk to her, they could find her there. The problem was that no suspects had been named in the news, so there was no way Marlene's sister could have heard from a news report that Marlene was being looked at for Shirley's murder. After what the officer had said, detectives went straight to a judge and got a warrant to search Marlene's home, which was located in one of the most prestigious neighborhoods in the area. When officers walked inside, almost immediately they found maps laid out on a table. They showed satellite images of the streets and Shirley's house, photos of the house from the outside, and even a detailed floor plan. They also found mail addressed to Shirley, and as we remember, when Chuck had checked Shirley's mailbox that morning, it was empty. But there was more. Mixed in with those papers were reports from several private investigators Marlene had hired. One had been watching Irvin, another had been watching Shirley. Neither of them had found any proof that the two were having an affair, but one detail in the reports immediately stood out to detectives. The investigator who had been watching Shirley had written that she often left her garage door open. And since the garage door had been open when Chuck arrived that morning, detectives started wondering if that was how Marlene had gotten inside Shirley's house. Around the same time, investigators decided to arrest Marlene. They sent officers to wait outside her attorney's office, which was almost directly across from the police station. Marlene stayed inside for several hours, and as soon as she finally came out, officers started walking toward her. When Marlene saw them, she turned around and ran back toward the building, trying to get back to her lawyer. But the officers caught her before she could make it inside. They took her into custody, although they did allow her to go in and tell her attorney what was happening. At first, Marlene refused to talk to police, but detectives already believed they might be able to build the case without a confession. They documented the cuts and bruises on her hands and arms, and they also noticed that some of her fingernails were broken. During all of this, Marlene also looked exhausted. She even fell asleep in the chair a few times, and investigators started to wonder if she had been awake all night trying to clean up the blood in Shirley's house. Eventually, Marlene did say that she had nothing to do with Shirley's murder, and that she had an alibi. According to her, she had spent the entire night at the home of a man named Tim, who she was in a relationship with. Police went to speak with Tim, and at first he backed her up, but that changed very quickly. As soon as detectives mentioned that they are investigating a murder, Tim admitted that he had only been with Marlene earlier that day. After that, he did not see her again until 8 a.m. the next morning, after Shirley had already been killed. He said the two of them had gone to a restaurant, and while they were there, Marlene asked him to lie if anyone asked about her alibi. Later, she also called him and asked to go to her house, pick up her laptop and tablet, and take them to her attorney's office. Tim did what she asked, but police later seized both devices anyway. Soon after all of this, the lab results came back. Experts had tested the evidence collected from Shirley's house, and they found Marlene's DNA in two important places: on the paper towels someone had used to wipe up blood, and on the shower curtain that had been pulled over Shirley's body. At the same time, the broken blade left in Shirley's neck had no fingerprints on it and no foreign DNA. Investigators also learned that Marlene had used her credit card near Shirley's house on the night of the murder, and her phone had been in that same area too. When detectives went through Marlene's phone, they found something else. The day before Shirley was killed, Marlene had written a text meant for Shirley, but accidentally sent it to the wrong number. In the message, she told Shirley to stay away from her husband and said the only way Shirley would ever be with him was over Marlene's dead body. The message went to a girl who had nothing to do with the case. She replied, telling Marlene she had the wrong number, and Marlene wrote back, "Is this Shirley Pierce?" By then, the evidence against Marlene was overwhelming, but she still refused to admit anything. She kept insisting that someone else had killed Shirley, and that she had nothing to do with it. A few months after Marlene's arrest, prosecutors announced that they would seek the death penalty. From that point on, the case began moving toward trial, but it took a long time to get there. 5 years passed, and during that time, prosecutors decided to take the death penalty off the table and pursue life in prison instead. The trial finally began in 2018 when Marlene was 65 years old. She had spent all those years in jail because the judge had denied her bond. The defense tried to argue that police had focused on Marlene almost immediately and had not seriously looked at anyone else. They also pointed out that investigators had not found Marlene's fingerprints or DNA on the knife blade. But they could not give the jury a convincing explanation for the evidence that actually did point toward her. Prosecutors, on the other hand, laid out a long list of evidence connecting Marlene to the crime. Their theory was that Marlene got into Shirley's house late that evening or sometime during the night, when Shirley was getting ready for bed. Then she went upstairs and attacked her in the bedroom with a knife. After a long struggle, prosecutors said, Marlene stabbed Shirley in the neck, killing her. Then she moved Shirley's body into the bathroom. Over the next several hours, Marlene tried to clean up the blood with bleach, but there was far too much of it. She also dumped out Shirley's purse and jewelry box, trying to make the scene look like a robbery and throw investigators off. As for the knife, investigators had found one more important detail while preparing for trial. At one point, they went to see Tim, Marlene's former partner. When they were inside his kitchen, they noticed a knife set with one knife missing. Experts examined the set and concluded that the murder weapon looked very similar to the missing knife. That meant Marlene may have taken it from Tim's kitchen ahead of time, probably hoping police would not be able to connect the weapon back to her. After all of that evidence was presented, the jury needed only 45 minutes to reach a verdict, and they found Marlene guilty. As soon as the verdict was read, Marlene collapsed to the floor, but the judge ordered her to be brought back to her feet so the verdict could be read. Sometime later, Marlene was given life in prison without the possibility of parole. In her final statement, she once again insisted that she had not killed Shirley and said she would never hurt anyone. After the trial, Marlene's attorneys tried to challenge the conviction. Their main argument was that police had gotten her phone location data without a warrant. The court agreed that this had been a violation, but it still rejected the appeal, saying the rest of the evidence against her was more than enough to prove her guilt. Today, Marlene is 73 years old and remains in prison. She continues to deny killing Shirley, insisting police never caught the real killer. But with a life sentence and no chance of parole, she is almost certainly never getting out. And there is one final detail worth remembering. Marlene's obsession with a supposed affair was never backed up by anything. 2 private investigators could not prove that Irvin and Shirley were ever having a relationship. Police could not prove it. No one at trial could prove it either. Not even Marlene's own attorneys. Irvin had always denied that there had ever been anything personal between him and Shirley herself had been in a serious relationship with another man for years. But Marlene kept stalking Irvin and Shirley even after her marriage had already fallen apart, which only made her fixation look even more irrational. Even Marlene's own daughter believed her mother had serious mental problems. But during the trial, experts did not find any severe condition that would mean Marlene had not understood what she was doing. Share your thoughts on this story in the comments section, and don't forget to press the like button if you enjoyed my video. Thank you for watching.